Well, hello, and welcome to Death Cafe with me, your Latinx bruja, Pastel Supernova. This is where I do my part to normalize heart-led conversations about death, dying, and loss. I'll be sharing personal journeys and conversing with some pretty insightful minds on everything to do with the inevitable. This is episode 3, and in this conversation, you'll meet K Brar. She's an Ayurvedic practitioner, a yoga therapist. She's been a colleague of mine, and she is a very good friend. I do have to apologize. My audio is not the best on this recording because I was in a bit of an echo chamber. But Karen's is, and the conversation is juicy, it is vulnerable, it is beautiful. Hi, Karen.
Hi.
Welcome to the Death Cafe.
Thank you.
I was just talking about being very excited to speak to you because, well, you know I love you, but you are brilliant, insightful, and also educated on this topic from lived experience to proper education and all of the things that have to do with what I call shadow work. Could you tell the world a little bit about yourself in your own words?
So I am an Ayurvedic practitioner and a yoga therapist and a Vedic counselor and an energy healer. So lots of words there. So I usually just say a holistic healer of sorts, but all from the background of the Vedic tradition. So yoga, Ayurveda, Jyotisha, um, where the ancient sacred teachings guide us.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Could you tell us how you got into it?
Sure. Well, and I think it's probably pretty fitting for what we're talking about here today. So I was raised as an only child to two South Asian immigrant parents, and at just before the age of 10, my dad had a massive stroke. And he went on to live a fairly challenged life for the next 25 years. And that, of course, changed the trajectory of my life and my mom's life. And that created a lot of pain and a lot of suffering, and a lot of ways to see living and grieving over those 25 years. My mom, then, before my dad passed away, my mom, a few years before that, was diagnosed with Parkinson's. So I've now been living and watching the dying process very slowly with both of my parents. Um, Needless to say, I was in and out of hospitals a lot because of that. And so, for my own reasons, in my early 20s, ended up practicing the physical yoga practice and the spiritual yoga practice to what I thought was first just to kind of heal my body from some injuries, and very quickly started to heal other aspects of me, my heart, my soul, different aspects of me, my mind. And because I was living in and out of hospitals with my parents, I started to also just have this part of me that just knew there had to be an alternative way to help with just overall health and well-being, and not that it had to replace the Western medical system, but that there was probably a way to kind of support it. And so that's what got me into the realm of really the holistic view. So that's the where Ayurveda lives. And when my dad actually passed away, which will have now been just over 8 years, it was the call that I think a lot of people have when a very jarring moment happens in your life, where you start to really realize the fragility of life and to not take it for granted. And I then moved from a fairly successful corporate career into this space full time because I just knew that I there was no more time to waste.
Ain't that the way? It's
Yeah.
interesting how this type of lived experience points out where our priorities actually lie.
Yeah, and I think there's just an element of what I've seen of myself and what I've witnessed of others is, for a number of reasons, we, from a biological standpoint to even kind of a more mental standpoint, it's incredibly difficult to be with the reality that this life is in fact going to end, and that is part of the natural cycle. And of course, we know that, right? We know that rationally, but to really be with that, to really be um, present with that, to really be accepting of that reality, requires and demands something very, very deep within us. And I just don't think that many of us have even the space to even be there in our day-to-day lives. And so it's hard for us to really witness that reality on a daily.
Yeah, no, for sure. I actually saw a video. This journalist was very open about fearing death. So she uh, documented herself going to a death doula and speaking to some different professionals that work specifically with death and dying to first face her fear, to learn how to talk about it, and to learn. But it was a video, and you could see physical fear on her face, just the conversation of it, because she was so unused to it, was showing up. She was agitated, she was nervous. The people she was speaking with continuously checked in to see if she could still, keep going with the conversation, and to see if she even wanted to keep going, because she was so distraught at first. By the end of the documentary, she relaxes a little bit, and clearly this is just the beginning for her. But I imagine there are tons of people like that who don't even have the courage to face it yet.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's a very important aspect of this lived experience, in the Vedic tradition. It's actually it's what we call one of the kleshas. And the kleshas are loosely described as kind of the poisons of our mind, the parts of our mind in which every human kind of naturally gravitates towards until we do conscious work to clear these kinds of blocks or challenges or poisons, let's say. And of these poisons, it's actually one of the five where if we have a fear of death, and if we have and I would even go as far as saying what they mean by that is also an unconscious understanding of this reality, then it will forever be present in the way in which you show up as a human and in your human lived experience. It will shadow, and it'll create a lens in which you will see the world. Um, and when we're able to really be with this reality and sit with this reality and understand this reality, that death is just part of the lived human experience and any form of the manifested experience. um, and we're able to like you're saying, even with this woman, sit with that, even just land in that reality, let alone then contemplate it, and then maybe even come to the place of acceptance of it. Only then will that veil be lifted, that poison of the mind be lifted.
I would say that's a lifelong process, right? Because it's as we change, our perceptions might change. We might feel like we're okay with it one time or for a span of time, and then something happens and it might alter, might create more questions.
Yeah, and
Do
for some it
you
might even be multiple life spans, right? It might not be in this lifespan that we're able to even arrive at that place of acceptance and really truly being with that reality for some, and that's okay, right? that again, from this Vedic perspective, the understanding is that that's what we're here. That is the cycle of life and death, is this the samsara, which is the cycle of coming back, soul into the next life, into the next life. And part of that is to clear a lot of these patterns and a lot of these veils, a lot of these ways in which we've shown up. And so I think there's something forgiving in that, that it doesn't have to be all worked out in this one lifetime either.
That's a really important piece that I haven't heard anyone verbalize. I don't think I've even considered it. I consider it in other elements, but this North American world that I've grown up in really is quick to call many things failures. And so I think it's really beautiful that you brought that up. It gives us a moment to at least appreciate that we're at that point and that we're not failures for not having it all together or not being okay with it or, having these doubts and these concerns.
Yeah, and I mean the idea that we don't have to have it all figured out, because we're not, right? We're just not. That is also part of the reality of this lived experience. We're not going to have it figured out, all of it, and that's okay. Um, but that goes into, some of these deeper spiritual conversations, right? There's a level of being with then an understanding that the soul, that there is even a soul for some, and that
Mm,
then the soul actually moves through this cycle, so that there are, for lack of a better term, there are more chances to get it right, to do it, to experience it, to clear, to live, to do all that. And so that, yeah, it's a bit of a deeper place for some people, and that in and of itself again gives us permission that we're not going to get it all sorted out in this one lifetime, depending on where we are.
yeah, there's enough to do in this lifetime.
Yeah, exactly.
I really like what you're talking about right now. And it's so rare to come across, people who genuinely speaking and passionate about these topics. So I just want to say I appreciate your narrative. Also, Pastel Supernova. I appreciate y'all guys having this type of talk.
Let's start with what I always really want to talk about, which is the nitty-gritty. When it comes to death, dying, and loss, I had a friend give me a really good insight. She lost her father when we were young, and when I lost my mother, she told me people are going to sound slightly insane. And by that, she meant callous and crass. I got the vibe. And she said, but you're also going to have to remember that for about a year, you're going to have the most clarity you've ever had. And it was touching because she's like, it can suck, but it's also very magical. And I did experience that and it was incredible, but because you have the most amount of clarity when you're in this type of state, there are a lot of shitty things people say. Very insensitive. Sometimes it's to try and kind of move on from the topic, and sometimes they really think they're trying to help. Can you share on some of your experiences and how you've navigated through that?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and your friend was right. It is probably going to be that one year where you see every experience from a completely different lens. And the bullshit meter is high, right? You can see
Yeah.
bullshit a mile away. So I totally agree with that. And that's kind of how we want to live, right? We want to be able to have the bullshit meter high at all times to be able to see through. Um, But as it relates to like what people have said, I'll be honest, I don't think I've had like really shitty things that people have said to me, which I'm grateful for. But I remember actually reading this soon after my dad passed and being really aware of it. That they're out of, I think, uncertainty of what to say and how to be, especially if you haven't fully experienced um, someone really close to you having died. I know for myself, but I know I've even had this conversation with you and many other people.
Mhm.
The individual is actually the one that hasn't had that experience yet. They just don't know. They don't get it. They don't fully understand where you are. They haven't been there. Um, and so they're doing their best that they can, which is, we all know that that must be difficult and it must be difficult, but I don't know how difficult. And so they're just really not aware of that, right? And bless them for that. What I had read, which resonated, was that often you'll hear people say, let me know how I can be of help. Let me know how I can be there for you. Let me know.
Mhm.
And then what that does is that actually puts the onus back on the person who's grieving.
Yep. It's tough. It's tough because that person's already holding so much. It,
We don't have the capacity for it. Like we literally don't have the capacity to now think about how can I tell you how to be there for me. Right. I literally don't have that in me right now. And that's part of the bullshit meter. like, like, why is that on me?
yep.
It can't be on me. It literally isn't on me. And then what I found was, and this is somewhat even just my personality, and you know that well, that I actually don't reach out to people quite often. And so the people really close to me know that, and then they'll check in. But the danger of a person who seemingly is strong, quote unquote strong, is that person
Mhm.
isn't checked in on because they're strong, right? They got it together. They figured it out. And I remember hearing that actually a lot in the week during, the services and whatnot for my dad. You're being really strong. I'm so impressed by how strong you are. And it's funny, I've heard this for most of my life, and I hate it. Like
Yeah.
it grinds me so deep. And again, I don't think that this is coming from a place of malice or malintent or any of that. It's because they're unaware and they're trying to connect in a way that they can. And so I would say to those out there, if you haven't heard this already, or if you didn't read it, or if you're unaware yourself, and I've caught myself many times, prior to really having lived it, please, before you say, I am so sorry, how can I be there for you? Just think of a way in which you can show up. And in the article that I had read, I remember reading, there was this one person who ended up just it was the week of the services, and so this person ended up just shining the shoes for the person who was grieving, just got the outfit ready for the person who was grieving, got the meal ready for the person who was grieving, literally just did all these minor small things so that the person who was grieving didn't have to think about it, because we don't have the capacity.
Yep. And the most mundane thing can still help because the grieving process, it's it goes for a year, 2 years, it continues on. So if you're somebody who wants to help, my advice would be to not downplay any type of gift. If you have a movie that you want to watch, like we don't always have to center the help around the grief itself. Pay attention to your person, and if you know they like something or if you've had any history in sharing a good moment, offer it as though you're already coming over to do it. And if they say no, don't take it personally, but those are genuine gifts and they will be received because the authenticity meter is there.
Yeah, totally.
I see Cindy and Legends are listening.
Glad to be here today, and I'm very much enjoying today's subject matter.
Thank you, Cindy. And we are talking right now about shitty things people say. And I will share one that, we've talked about this in death doula training. We've talked about this, Karen, you and I, in the past, but it's the need to brush it over, to offer a solution, to say, my brother has been told, you'll get over it when our mother died. And I think that friendship no longer exists. There are things that people want to brush over. I was offered to make a baby with a perfect stranger because he thought that I should be creating life to honor my mother's death, like 1 week later or something like this. This is a man at the shop. And I'll never, I don't think I'll ever forget that one. And he wasn't even trying to be a dick. Like I could see it in his eyes and his manner. He was like, we should make a baby and honor her. And the point I'm trying to get to is that there is no solution. If someone's sharing that they're not in a good place, just let them not be in a good place. If that makes you uncomfortable, you don't have to say a thing. Taking a big, deep breath with someone is actually quite a generous gift because when someone's grieving, they're often not breathing either enough or at all at some points. And that's a nice physical reminder that creates connection and brings us back into the moment. And if you're feeling ways in front of someone who's grieving, it might actually give you a little bit of insight into how they are feeling.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think that's like creating space is a term we're hearing more and more. And I often find people don't actually know what that means. And it
Yeah.
really is just what you just said, right? Which is literally creating a pause in your own self through breath, creating a little bit of space between your own reactions so that you can maybe consider something else. And if you have enough self awareness beyond that, to then be able to notice that I'm having a reaction right now to someone else grieving. The person who offered to make a baby, that's completely about them, right? That is completely
100.
their desire, right? And so obvious, like to be able to have enough self-awareness, and you can't have that self-awareness prior to creating that space, right? Like from a neurobiological standpoint, the way in which the mind can even come into the prefrontal cortex, which is our rational thinking brain, we have to literally take a longer, deeper exhale to move from the hippocampus to the prefrontal cortex, to move from the emotional state to a rational state. And on a really simple, fundamental level, what that means is that breath creates space in your mind, space in your thoughts, space in your reactions. And then you'll be able to actually notice something other than yourself. And if nothing else, say nothing, right? In that space, you're saying nothing. And that will
Mhm.
be more welcomed than, again, any of this bullshit. Um, and so, yeah, it is an incredibly difficult thing to do. This is where we call this a practice because you have to do it daily. And in that practice, you'll be able to then recognize the moments where you're actually in that heightened state, where you'll need it, where you'll need to call on it. And I also remember when the week that after my dad had passed, I had come back to work. I was still working in the corporate world. And I remember I was sitting in a management meeting with all of my peers and our executive, and I wasn't in the right headspace to even be back yet. But
Right.
around the room, they're just, kind of talking about their own annoyances at work, right? They're airing
Mm.
their work grievances. And I literally what I realized, or what they realized, is in my head, I'm like, I cannot believe that we're talking about this right now. None of this matters. And my
Mm-hmm.
face obviously read it. Just my face, which I have been known to do, just read it. And then I think they all turned to me at a certain point and realized how just unimportant everything that they were talking about was.
Yeah.
And I didn't say anything, but it's in those moments where I think they even felt like, oh, okay, this is not appropriate right now. And so, anyways, to say that my executive, my leader, pulled me aside afterwards, and she had a lot of compassion, and I was so grateful for her, because she actually had said to me, "Listen, I remember reading this or hearing this once, and I wanted to share this with you because I think you're kind of there right now." And it still makes me quite emotional when I think of this. But when you're in deep, deep grieving, it feels, and it literally feels like you are drowning,
Yeah.
like you are in the middle of the ocean and you can't come up for air. And what she wanted me to know was that there will be a moment where you're going to come up for air. And then that moment will come a little bit closer together and a little bit closer together. And eventually you'll be able to notice that there's a life raft, and you might be able to hold on to the life raft for even half a second. And then eventually you might even be able to hold on to the life raft for a few minutes. And eventually over time, you'll be able to get yourself with enough strength onto the life raft. But know that the life raft is there. Know that time you will be able to breathe a little longer, a little bit closer together, and you will eventually have the strength to get onto that life raft. And it was the most poignant thing for me at the time, because I really couldn't even verbalize the kind of pain that I was going through. And for somebody to just tell me, you're going to be able to get on that life raft. It may not be today, but you will. That in and of itself was a lifeline.
Yeah.
And you need those lifelines.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I remember around, I mean, I don't know if it was exactly at that point, but when you were suffering in your grief, you would just tell me, my heart hurts. My heart hurts. And I felt so much, because I didn't know what that meant, but I completely believed you. And then when I felt heart pain, you were the first person that popped into my mind. And I was like, oh my God. And your experience was actually my raft.
Mm.
Because I was like, okay, this will change. I promise you guys, it won't pass. It won't go away. It will
No.
change.
Yeah.
It will change.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good point, too, right? That to also find the people who've actually been through it, because they are your life raft. You can hold on to them and they will be there for you. They know. So if you're lucky enough to be around people who haven't gone through that kind of grief yet, I'm so happy for those people. But find yourself one or two people who have, because they get it, they know, and you'll be able to feel that support from that person. And it's necessary. You need it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is it that a grieving person, especially in visually manners, needs a trigger warning?
For me personally, I would answer no, because if there's anything we've learned is that the grief will never go away. And it's just getting to know yourself and doing the things that you need to do, like Karen said, in practice, making it something of personal work so that when these triggers do come up, you learn how to navigate it.
Yeah, well, and I have lots of opinions on the concept of triggers. But maybe how I would respond to this question, and goes a bit back to what you were saying, Pastel, around the heart hurting so much, right? So when a person is grieving, and we've even heard this now from some, I think, celebrities even, but that often they realize that for themselves, the experience of grief is love that has nowhere to go.
Yep.
And I think they say something like that. And I've actually grappled with that kind of concept, but I think that there's some truth to it. And yeah, when you mentioned, yeah, for sure, my heart literally felt broken, when my dad had passed. And I remember actually looking it up thinking, oh God, am I having a heart attack? And yeah, there's like, if you actually like look it up on Google, this is like a very highly searched question, because the heart center literally does energetically feel like it is broken.
Yeah.
And the pain in that, makes people often feel as though they're having a heart attack, because it's a very similar, I guess, perceived sensation. And where I'm going with this is that the grief, right? If we were to believe that statement that it's love with nowhere to go. Why I had such a hard time grappling with that is because love always has somewhere to go.
Mm-hmm.
And in the moment where the body is gone, our perception and our mind and our even our neural pathways are having a really hard time conceptually with that. And so that's why it feels like the love has nowhere to go. But if you allow yourself to, on your own timing, through the process of grieving, understand for yourself that that love always has somewhere to go, even out just into the ether, out into nature, out into the sky, out to a friend, to a loved one, to your water, to your meal, to something, to the energy that is always around
Mm-hmm.
us, that it will be received. And that's what we're seeking, is for that love to go and be received. And it
Yes.
will be. It will always be received. And so we need to give ourselves the grace and the time to allow our mind to make sense of the fact that the body is no longer there. But once we have, to be able to open ourselves up to know and to feel the experience of love still being received,
Mm-hmm.
our love being received, and also for us to then open ourselves up to receiving. And then I
Yes.
think if we do that, then the triggers aren't triggers, because we're healing.
I mean, in the sense that we trigger people, and that's why the weird responses or somewhat insensitive comments.
Right. So, like, the grieving person is triggering the other?
Yeah, I think that's what she means. And I think that's an interesting question. Yeah, and I would say, without, going into the details of every individual and why and how they're triggered, I think it's an easy blanketed statement for us to say that, yeah, most people are easily triggered by discomfort of any kind, right? And watching a person be in the deepest form of discomfort in front of us is going to be triggering, for the simple fact that that's making us now uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And none of us want to feel this shit, right? And so, yeah, that's triggering 100%. And that's why I had mentioned, the ideal goal when we are creating space through our breath, creating space through our thoughts, creating space in our mind, that creating of space is allowing us over time to respond versus react. And when we respond, that's very different, because it's not from a place of being triggered. And so we'll be able to eventually develop some self-awareness to understand that, oh shit, I'm uncomfortable right now. This person is deeply grieving and it's making me really uncomfortable.
Mhm.
Okay, right? Just like you said, take a breath, nothing else. Doesn't have to be solved, it doesn't have to be fixed, it doesn't have to be changed. It's what it is.
Just taste the discomfort for a moment. It will teach you something, and that's okay. Well, I've seen many videos of how children deal with um, being present in front of grief. And children don't offer words of advice or anything. They usually, very naturally, will just stand there and watch someone cry. They might hold their hand, they might offer a hug. Those are very honest reactions, are so beautiful, and that's you, that's like actually deep inside you. So I would encourage anyone, if they're really in a place of discomfort, to offer their child selves to come up and see what happens. It doesn't have to be intellectualized. We don't have to be smart all the time. We can just be present. And I think part of it is because we downplay the importance of being present with someone, but kids haven't been programmed to think otherwise yet when they're doing it. So it seems like, well, I do believe it is magical, but uh, magical in a way that is just so honest that it lands.
Yeah, totally.
Hey ladies, how you doing, Pastel? How are you, Karen? Nice to see you or meet you. I think I heard you possibly before. And how you doing, Cindy?
Yeah.
Always a pleasure. You're talking about a lot of things. I just wanted to chime in and make my presence known. But one thing you did hit on is referencing like just going through something, pain, trials. The silver lining in it, and is that as we are able to vocalize and identify the commonalities that we all go through, there's so much strength in that. I think a lot of us do it when we go through difficult times. We're like, I remember my friend went through something similar, or we are able to almost exhume the strength that somebody else that we know had during a challenging time in their lives, and kind of use it as a barometer or a guide or a step to keep us moving in the right direction, so to speak. So there is silver lining in a lot of that. So, and that's a beautiful thing about life and commonality in general. So much love to y'all.
Absolutely. I mean, that's why we are at the Death Cafe. We all go through this. So it's nothing to be ashamed about. It's nothing to apologize for. Please, I encourage anyone who's listening, if you are going through something, please never apologize. Practice not apologizing, even if you want to in your head, just as an exercise. Avoid doing it just because there's nothing to be sorry for. It is just what's happening.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying, Legends, is, so important, which is, you know, just simply connecting, talking, sharing,
Mm.
and normalizing what our experiences are, in recognizing that we're having very similar experiences. This is going to be something that we all experience in some way, shape, or form at some point in our lived experience, and we have to. And that's part of doing this thing called human. And when we do it and we talk about it and we share in it, that is also
Yeah.
doing this thing called human, because we're now connecting, right? And we're not so alone. And especially when we're grieving, it is an incredibly lonely place if you don't pull yourself back out into the world. And the unfortunate thing is in the modern world that we live in, there has to be some form of effort, right? And this goes back to, how can you support others? We don't live in tribes anymore, where we would have just had our tribe around us.
Mhm.
Now we have to walk down the street, pick up the phone, do something, do some form of action in order to find our tribe again, or to reconnect with our tribe. But it is incredibly important, and it is necessary for this human experience, for us to do that. And when we do, yeah, that helps, because it's speaking back to the level of connection into the heart, which is going to help in that healing process for sure.
Karen, because of the practice that you have, but also the services you offer, do you ever come across someone who's grappling with a non-spiritual connection, or, like doubts? Do all of your clients kind of embody what you offer, or do you get some blockages or questions regarding the quote unquote validity of the energetic realm?
Well, so I think a lot of the clients that I work with, um, many will come with maybe questions or doubts, or haven't really even thought about it and haven't really spent much time with it, or have maybe a history with a concept that is different, um, to the concept of spirituality, which is different than energy. And so when working with individuals, first I try to get them to even land with what they can sense and feel. And so before we talk about souls, I can often, guide them to at least feel and sense energy. And then over time, for those people who are maybe grappling with the concept of soul, that would probably be a longer journey for them over time. But when you're talking about practices, there are two that I often would work with and ask clients to work with. Personally, I've used them, and then again for others. And the first one is a really simple one. There's very little that you need to do, and in the notion of daily practice, or even a few times a week or once a week, or where there's some form of consistency, is to go out into nature.
Mm.
And this is way more important for us city dwellers, because your neurology, your bioneurology is dependent on it on a good day, right? Like, but especially when you are in deep grief, or where the nervous system is dysregulated for an incredibly long period of time, this is, you know, backed by science, by modern science, but we all just know this. This is like, we are nature. We are an aspect of nature. We are a manifestation, that we share with the rest of nature. And so when we go into nature without having to intellectualize it or prove it or tell people what's happening, we've all experienced a deeper breath, a
Mm.
moment that is more still. And when that starts to happen over time, we land, right? The body lands, the mind lands, the energy lands. And this is all just going to happen, right? You don't have to make it happen. Just being in it will help you. And then when that happens, then you're more open. Your consciousness is more present and open to then maybe experience the felt sense of shared energy, the energy of the trees, the energy of the ground, the energy of the wind, the energy of the sun, the energy of the water. But you don't even have to like really do anything other than just be in it. And so I would say that is a practice that I would urge anybody
Mhm.
who really needs to be able to take that deeper breath to do. So find a park if you can't, if going out into like the deep woods is not possible for you, or going to the ocean is not possible for you, find a park, right? Get yourself at least in some form where you are surrounded by nature.
I don't think it's a coincidence that during the lockdowns, everybody suddenly became a gardener. Everybody suddenly started hoarding plants and getting into little pots of dirt when they weren't allowed to leave the house. And something in them knew that they needed this richness of the earth and just even a little bit of life to observe and to care for and
Mm-hmm.
just to be around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, I know I had this experience, but I know my partner also had this experience, and I've had discussions with other people who also have had a similar experience. Again, you mentioned that especially in that first year of like deep, deep grief, you're just experiencing the world from a different lens, and you're it's just different. And I remember for myself, I had many moments where I would just be like all of a sudden immediately pulled to a sunset in a way that I'd never been pulled to a sunset. Or, I a few months after my dad passed, I happened to be um, at the Pacific Ocean, and there was just this moment that just drew me. I didn't try, it just pulled me in. And it was this like confluence of the wind and the sound of the waves and the sun and all of these moments that I started to notice. I had a deep pull to my dad.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't again, I didn't look for it. I wasn't trying to make it happen. It was as though these aspects of nature were just calling me. And again, I've had this conversation with so many other people where they just mentioned it as like a sunset that is just so brilliant. A day or two after a person passes is remarkable and magical and special, and you will just notice it. So look up, look around, like do these things, because I think that will also be a form of a lifeline.
Yeah. The earth has a way of revealing her magnificence and helping you.
Hmm.
Oh,
And all of the other aspects that surround her. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So that would be one practice I would definitely, and I think that, we can all connect to that, whether you have a spiritual practice or not.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other practice that I've personally done, it was the first time I was introduced to it, was actually on that same trip when I was at the Pacific Ocean. I was lucky enough to be in Maui, and I did the Ho'oponopono practice for the
I was
first time.
hoping you'd bring this up. Yes, please.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's an incredibly beautiful, profound practice. So if you're not familiar with it, it comes from the land of Hawaii, and it is such a gorgeous, it's been, described as a prayer. It's been described as a practice. You can do it in the form of journaling. You can do it in the form similar to like a mantra practice through repetition. You can do it in the form of meditation. You can do it in the form of prayer, in whatever way feels best for you. Um, how I often guide it, how I often practice it myself, is in the form of journaling and reflecting. And the process itself is really quite simple and beautiful. It's really just four simple statements, and they are: I am sorry, I forgive you, thank you, and I love you. And what's really beautiful about these four statements is that there's often things left unsaid. There are often um, parts of us that wish we still had more time. Um, it's just never enough, right? And so, in this practice, as we are going through the process of grieving, it helps the person who is still here to move through the practice of forgiveness. And the forgiveness often we find not just for the other person, but also for ourselves. And then it's also, again, in sharing maybe the words that we didn't say enough, or we wanted to say more, like I love you.
Yeah.
And then offering gratitude. Thank you for this connection, for this experience, for this for this form in which we were able to share in. And so I find the practice incredibly beautiful. And again, you don't necessarily have to have a spiritual practice. This is effective and profound on so many different layers and levels.
Mhm.
It helps a person from their own mind's aspect to be able to kind of release and let go of things that maybe they're still holding on to. And again, they wish they had more time with. And in the journaling practice, what makes it so beautiful as a ritual is then after we've written this all down, after we've really truly acknowledged these four parts, we then burn the piece of paper or flush it down the toilet, or we release it fully,
Mhm.
right, through ritual. And in that final piece, there is a release and a letting go and a surrendering that just simply becomes the byproduct, which is really, 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 really important in the grieving process.
There's something so beautiful about using the elements to destroy the paper, I think, because you will see it become something else. You will see it transform, and because we're in fact working on transmuting our grief, and so it's just a visual aid in seeing the change.
Yeah.
Just on the point of grief, I think like sometimes the work, or what we quote unquote think doing the work is really just positioning ourselves to be receptive, and to be in a mind space where we can receive what's happening in that moment. So sometimes the actual work is the practice of positioning ourselves to be ready to do the work. I know it sounds really elementary, but it's the truth. Like, and that's true for anything, I think, for most things in life. Like sometimes the work is literally just getting out of bed, making a cup of coffee, and
Mhm.
then being grateful for the day, and going from that mindset, you know. I feel like a lot of us, especially when it comes to grief or just life changes, like we have to do this big giant work. And sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes it's the little things that matter the most. And positioning ourselves to be receptive to that is so crucial at times.
100%. I couldn't agree with you more.
Same. Yeah, absolutely. It is often in those little moments. And I think the beautiful thing about it, the grieving process, especially the early days of it, is that that's all you have the capacity for.
Mhm.
And so you'll recognize that and you'll know that it is literally just getting up. It is literally just feeding yourself a meal. It is literally taking rest. And if
Yeah.
we're open to being present to how profound that is, we'll recognize that to not just be necessary in that moment, but also just necessary in life. And that will shift us.
Is there anything you would like to say to anybody or any particular moment in time if we were able to go and deliver last words? Do you have any?
Yeah, and I think it goes back to be honest, the Ho'oponopono. I think that for me personally, when I went through it with my dad, and in some form, I've been going through it with my mom because she is still physically here, but not in many, many, many ways. And so my saying goodbye has been kind of this slow burn, but also not really quite effective. From here on out, she won't really know it in the same way that I wished she had known it or heard it. And a lot of that is, when we live with a form of regret and wished that it had gone differently. And as we shift and grow and change, we see the world differently. We see our experiences differently. We see other people differently. And so often for me, it's been around, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for a number of reasons, but I'm sorry that, our relationship didn't get a chance to be that way, or I'm sorry of certain very particular things. I'm sorry of what transpired. I'm sorry that I couldn't be the person that I am now. I'm sorry is definitely part of what I have had to process myself for a lot of my own grieving process.
Mhm.
And then with my dad, similarly, if you're around from the beginning of this podcast episode, I mentioned that my dad got sick when I was 10, and he lived as a stroke patient for 25 years. And I didn't know this at the time, but it was later in my 30s where I started to realize I just had a lot of regret on the experience that I didn't get to have with him, right? Watching a person slowly die is a very unique experience. He was there, right? And so in many ways, I was very lucky that he was still around. But I didn't get to actually hear his advice. I didn't get to hear him get mad at me. I didn't get to hear all the ways in which he was going to father me. And what I did hear was how wonderful of a man he was before he got sick. And so a lot of the processing that I've had is, in wishing for having experienced those moments with him and offering them to myself. The one thing we all want to hear from our parent is that they're proud of us,
Mhm.
that, what we've turned into, the work that they did to guide us, they're proud of it. And so for me, I had to actually kind of do the work to tell myself, to really do it for myself. And there's a lot of power in that too, right? And not just to tell myself and pat myself on the back in self-love kind of way, but almost be the channel for him and to trust and to know that he did love me and he was proud of me. And even though I didn't hear those words, that I know that it was true. And to be present with that, and again to open yourself up to be receptive to something that may not have transpired on this human form, but that transpired on some other form.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I can feel it.
Mhm.
This is also beautiful because anything we do for self that allows for flow through, so that when we're ready to receive, then we're also ready to give.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have last words for today. I did some homework. An orange. That's my homework. No, I'm just kidding. So the story of an orange goes back to my grandmother, who grew up in the Great Depression. And when she was a little girl, all she wanted for Christmas was some fruit. And that was like unbelievable if that was going to happen for her. And when she was little, she got fruit, and that fruit happened to be an orange. And she used to tell me the story all the time of how grateful she was to have this orange. And that story as a little kid stuck with me and it still does to this day. And when I delivered her eulogy, because she passed in 2009, I brought an orange. I did her eulogy, and I placed that orange right on her casket. And it was I'm so grateful for that. And it's something so simple, but something so profound. So hopefully I'll never look at an orange the same again.
Hmm.
I love that.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
It again, so simple, but the orange symbolically represents abundance and literal zest for life. We are talking about a lot of heart pain today, and so I would like to just take a moment to offer some herbs that will assist you in grief. You can drink these as a tea, or you can just create almost like a potpourri of these herbs. but lemon balm literally calms the heart and it helps with nightmares. This will help soothe you and relieves belly tension so that, you know, the physical aches and pains you get from holding on to all of these terrible feelings. It will help calm your body down so that it's not breaking down while you're trying to keep going. Lavender and rose hips and chamomile and sunflower petals all help soothe. The first three are calming, but sunflower petals give you a little bit of energy. They help with empowerment. You know, like the orange, it'll help lift you up. Go for orange flowers in general, but the sunflowers, the heliotropes, they help move you forward if you're just really feeling sluggish and low energy. And sunflower petals and dandelion will give you a little bit of a pat on the back and help you physically move forward. Karen, I know you know a lot about a natural healing process. Do you have anything to offer in terms of assistance that we can call upon?
Yeah, of course, from an Ayurvedic lens, we also see grief kind of manifest differently from individual to individual, right? And so, for some of you, without going into a full Ayurvedic lesson here, for some people, we're going to see the process of grief manifest in what would be called the Vata way, and this is one of the three doshas, where we might see a little bit more discomfort or unable. They're unsettled, let's say. Um, and that we would likely recommend maybe something more like a tulsi leaves as a tulsi tea, a byanga, which is a form of self-oilating massage or oilated massages, nasya, which is another form of oilation through the nostril passageway. And these are all ways so that we can create some groundedness in our own being to then be able to be with the grief, to be with the emotions, to be with the day to day experiences that we're having. It might show up more from a pitta way in which maybe there is an intensity to the way in which we're feeling. Grief in and of itself, we often would say, has a subdoshic home in the heart where pitta is involved, and it's often the connection between the heart and the mind, and it's saying to the mind right now, this is my time to lead and to be in charge, and we must be with our emotions. And in order to do that and to help ourselves, you've mentioned it, rose would probably be a really beautiful way for us to land and to ground and to open ourselves up, to soften some of that intensity. And then more from a Kaffic standpoint might be like, I can't get up. I'm almost frozen or stuck and I can't get out of bed. And this might then require us to do perhaps even a little bit more of a lighter meal, um, go for a walk, move the body in a gentle way, um, do something physically with the body so that it will kind of unstick itself. And those would be some really high level ways from a practical lifestyle perspective. Some might be herbs, some might be practice itself, without it being overcomplicated, without it needing, a deep practice every day. I think these are all fairly simple ways. So the first thing we would want to just know is, how is this manifesting for you? And then it's kind of the basic principle is just do the opposite.
Mm. Karen, would you like to share your father's name?
Hmm. Yeah, his name was Ishar Brar. Ishar Brar.
Papa Brar, and I call your mom Mama Brar.
Mm-hmm. Mama B.
Mama B. Let's take a beat and call this a fantastic conversation. Karen, how can we find you online? You have so many good services and so much knowledge. I feel like everybody should talk to you.
Thank you, love. So on Instagram, you can find me at karen.k.brar. And I have a company called Sāra Sacred Healing. So that's Sara Sacred Healing. Yeah, and there are many ways in which I have offerings from one-to-one to group kind of online memberships programs. I have a retreat coming up next month, actually around forgiveness, compassion. So a lot of similar topics here in order for us to find that deeper space within ourselves. These are often elements and aspects that we must face. So there is a whole day retreat that I'm running here in Toronto, and we'll be offering online virtually as well. So that you can find at both on Instagram or on my website.
Thank you, ladies, for today. Thank you for letting me be present in this space with you. Yeah, all of you. Have a beautiful rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone, for your shares today. It's been beautiful to share this space with you.
And thank you, Pastel, for creating this space for us to have these conversations, to share, to hold with each other. It is important.
And that's it. Thank you for listening. If you want to join in on the live recording, find me on the Stereo platform every Sunday. You can find me online at Pastel Supernova, or if you want to tune in only to my death doula related work, catch me on IG at Death Doula Pastel. I'd love to hear from you, so please email your stories and questions for discussions to info@pastelsupernova.com. Until next time, blessings and respect.